What if you've been fundamentally misreading people your entire life? What if the most telling signs of a person's true character are not found in what they celebrate, but in what they secretly despise? Imagine having a key, designed by the legendary psychiatrist Carl Jung, that unlocks the hidden parts of anyone's personality with just 2 carefully aimed questions. This isn't a parlor trick. By the time this video is over, the way you listen to people and yourself will be permanently altered. You feel like you're a pretty good judge of character, right? You watch people, listen to their stories, and you form a picture. But what if that picture is just a carefully curated facade? Carl Jung, a pioneer who mapped the depths of the human mind, proposed something that turns our casual observations upside down. He said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead to a better understanding of ourselves." But there's a deeper layer to that idea most people miss. Jung found that a person's real self doesn't emerge in their triumphs or their stated ambitions. It bleeds out in moments of unconscious reaction, and that's the secret I am about to share with you. For over half a century, Jung studied the intricate machinery of the human spirit, and his findings are nothing short of revolutionary. He saw that each of us crafts a public identity, a persona, which is the face we want the world to see. It's our social mask. But tucked away behind this polished front is what Jung termed the shadow, all the instincts, desires, and traits we've disowned because they didn't fit the image we wanted to project. Now, this is where it gets incredibly practical, so listen closely. Jung taught that as long as we feel safe and composed, our persona holds firm. We can be whoever we decide to be. But 2 specific psychological triggers, 2 moments of pressure, will always cause that mask to slip. And in those moments, Jung's 2 questions strike gold. He believed these moments expose more about a person than you could learn in a decade of friendship. Why? Because they bypass the conscious mind. The brain's press secretary and tap directly into our unconscious drives, the hidden forces that are truly running the show. Before I hand you these keys, you have to grasp one core principle of our nature that Jung unveiled. He famously stated, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is the engine that makes these questions work. Jung envisioned our psyche in layers: the persona, our public self; the ego, our conscious identity; the personal unconscious Ella's memories we've buried; the shadow, parts we've rejected; and the collective unconscious as universal human blueprints. Here is the masterstroke. Jung realized that when specific triggers are pulled, our responses shoot straight past the persona and the ego. We answer from our raw, unscripted core, what Jung called our true self. He pinpointed 2 such triggers, and they are astonishingly reliable. The first is connected to what Jung called psychological projection. He discovered that we unknowingly cast our own disowned traits, our shadow, onto others. So, what we loudly condemn in another person is often a whisper of something hidden within us. The second trigger involves what he called ego vulnerability. Whenever our cherished image of ourselves is challenged or dramatically inflated, our true character rushes out to defend it, exposing itself in the process. So, what are these 2 profoundly revealing questions? Focus now, because how they are understood is far more critical than the words themselves. The first question is, what type of person sparks an immediate, almost irrational dislike in you? Now you have to listen to the answer through a Jungian lens, because the surface level interpretation is almost always wrong. Jung found that the qualities we vehemently detest in others are almost always a direct reflection of our own shadow self. The parts of our own nature we have pushed into the dark and refused to acknowledge. He termed this psychological projection, and it's one of the most potent tools for seeing behind the curtain of personality. When someone answers this, they think they're describing someone else. In reality, they are handing you a detailed diagram of their own inner exile. And here's where the detective work begins. Pay attention to the emotional charge in their words. According to Jung, the more passion and anger someone directs at a trait in others, the higher the probability that they are wrestling with that exact same trait themselves. Remember his words, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Let's look at some examples from Jung's work. If someone tells you they can't stand people who are fake, Jung might infer that this person struggles with their own authenticity. They may be so used to wearing a mask that the authenticity of others feels like a threat or a judgment. If someone detests arrogant or boastful people, Jung often discovered this pointed to an individual who has suppressed their own ambition and sense of self-worth so severely that seeing it in others is unbearable. If someone says they hate controlling people, Jung's research almost always showed this was a person with deep-seated anxieties about losing control themselves, who may manage that fear by trying to control their own environment meticulously. But here is the brilliant twist that Jung uncovered, making this question a master key. The shadow isn't just a container for bad traits. It holds any quality we've learned to deny in ourselves, including positive ones. Sometimes people say they despise people who are the life of the party or overly optimistic. Jung realized this often reveals a person who has silenced their own inner joy or locked away their desire for connection because they were taught it was frivolous or unsafe. Now for the second question, which is perhaps even more powerful because it probes a moment when a person's defenses are naturally at their weakest. The second question is, describe a time you were completely convinced you were right, only to find out you were mistaken. Here, Jung's insight is at its most potent, because this question unearths something most of us are blind to in ourselves. Jung saw that how a person navigates being wrong is infinitely more revealing than how they handle being right. The reason, it attacks what Jung called our ego construct, our internal story of ourselves as capable and intelligent. When that story is proven false, Jung said, a cascade of unconscious defense protocols is triggered, denial insisting they weren't really wrong, that the facts were misleading. Rationalization, weaving complex narratives to explain why their mistake was logical at the time. Projection, shifting blame to others for giving them bad information. Minimization, declaring that the issue was trivial and didn't matter anyway. But here's Jung's discovery that might just change how you see strength. People with the most integrated characters don't resort to these tactics. They do something Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. They can accept the reality that they were wrong without it shattering their sense of self-worth. As Jung put it, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And those who can look their errors in the eye are the ones on the fastest path to that authentic self. But you must watch for specific answers as they betray fundamental character structures. If a person claims they can't think of a single example, Jung would see this as a sign of profound denial. They have constructed such a rigid fantasy of their own perfection that they've erased all evidence to the contrary. Jung called this psychological inflation, an ego that has become so brittle it cannot withstand any fracture. If someone's story immediately focuses on external blame, Jung saw this as pointing to an external locus of control. These are people who see life as something that happens to them, not something they co-create. Consequently, they rarely assume full ownership of their lives. If a person gets angry or defensive while answering, Jung noted this reveals an individual whose entire identity is fused with being right. Their self-esteem is so fragile that admitting a single mistake feels like psychological annihilation. But if a person can recount their mistake and, crucially, what they learned from it, Carl Jung saw this as a sign of psychological maturity and what he termed integration, the capacity to embrace all parts of oneself, the brilliant and the flawed. And now we arrive at the deepest insight Jung had about this process. He said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Jung knew these two questions worked so effectively because they trick people into looking inward, even when they believe they are talking about the world outside. The first question makes them unknowingly reveal their shadow projections. The second makes them unconsciously demonstrate their relationship with their own imperfection. But Jung went even further, and you must understand this pattern. He found that people tend to fall into predictable categories based on how they respond to this inner inquiry. The inflated ego type, these individuals cast all darkness onto others and are incapable of admitting fault. Jung found that these are, paradoxically, the most deeply insecure people, having built a fortress of defenses to keep their own shadow at bay. The self-flagellating type, these people often confess to hating traits they clearly possess, and they almost gleefully list their mistakes. Jung saw this as another, more subtle defense. By performing a superficial self-critique, they avoid the much harder work of genuinely grappling with their flaws. The integrated type, these are the rare few. They can see their projections for what they are and can discuss their mistakes without their world falling apart. Jung called this psychological wholeness the very definition of a healthy mind. And here, Jung's intuition becomes a truly powerful tool. Carl Jung discovered that when you recognize a person's core pattern, you can anticipate their actions with surprising accuracy. Why? Because, as he realized, we are far more consistent than we think. We just replay our fundamental inner script in various situations. But there is one final, crucial layer to this. If you followed me this far, you need to hear this. Jung spent his life studying what he called the dark side of humanity, and he identified clear warning signs that emerge in the answers to these questions. Red flag number 1. They paint their shadow onto a single group of people. Jung noted that psychologically balanced individuals see flaws scattered among all types of people. But when someone consistently projects all negative traits onto one target, be it a political party, a nationality, a generation, this, according to Jung, signifies a dangerously fractured psyche. Red flag number 2. They cannot recall ever being seriously wrong about something that mattered. Carl Jung believed this level of self-deception signaled what he called a dangerous detachment from reality, a state of psychological inflation that often precedes a major personal crisis. Red flag number 3. Their entire demeanor shifts when they discuss what they despise. Jung taught that an abrupt surge of emotion, a flash of anger, a sneer of disgust, means you've struck a major shadow complex. The bigger the reaction, the more repressed energy you've just unleashed. Red flag number 4. They immediately become hostile and turn the questions back on you. Jung observed that those who most aggressively reject or deflect this kind of inquiry are often the ones with the most to hide in their shadow. But perhaps the single most important realization Jung ever had was this. He said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. If this information has sparked some kind of chemical reaction within you, then I urge you to share this knowledge. Your simple act could be the spark that begins another's transformation. Jung discovered that these questions don't just reveal character, they can actively change it. Why? Because the very act of sincere self-inquiry is what Jung called the start of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you were truly meant to be. This is precisely why you must handle this knowledge with care. Jung taught that once you see another's shadow, you have a profound choice. You can use it to your advantage, or you can use it to deepen your compassion. Manipulation, Jung discovered, creates a psychological poison that sickens both the user and the used. But when you use this insight for genuine connection, he found something incredible happens. Relationships deepen and become real. And now comes the part Jung realized would change your perception of everything. These questions, he saw, are a two-way street. As you pose them to someone else, you can't help but hear your own answers echoing in your mind. When you observe another person's projections, you illuminate your own. When you dissect how they handle their errors, you are forced to confront your own relationship with being wrong. Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead to a better understanding of ourselves. This isn't just a poetic phrase, It is a fundamental law of psychological growth. And yet, Jung found an even deeper truth. Once you grasp these psychological dynamics, they become a universal lens. In your relationships, you can begin to see past the persona and connect with the deeper patterns in your partner, leading to a more profound intimacy. In your career, you can better understand the hidden motivations and blind spots of your colleagues, recognizing that most workplace conflicts are born from unexamined shadow projections. As a parent, you can guide your children towards self-awareness by demonstrating what honest self-reflection looks like. Jung believed children who learn to befriend their shadow early develop resilient mental health. As a leader, you can build a culture where authenticity is not a liability. True leadership, according to Jung, begins with acknowledging your own shadow. But here is the most important lesson Jung learned about all this. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. He found that people who get good at analyzing others often use it as a sophisticated shield against looking at themselves. They become psychological detectives, examining everyone else's crime scene while ignoring the chaos in their own home. According to Jung, this is the ultimate trap of psychological knowledge. It can become another mask, another clever way to dodge a real encounter with yourself. He said, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." The same is true for wisdom. Your task isn't to diagnose others, but to find and dismantle the barriers you've built against knowing your own soul. So here is my final challenge to you. Carl Jung journeyed into the most challenging landscapes of the human spirit. What he discovered there was not neat or pretty. It was not the sanitized, listicle version of self-help we often crave. It was something far more real and, at times, unsettling. Every person we meet is a mirror, reflecting pieces of ourselves we've spent a lifetime trying to ignore. But he saw something essential that most of us miss. Before we can truly hope to understand anyone else, to decode their motives, to predict their choices, to help them heal, we have to first aim that powerful lens inward. We must find the courage to face the uncomfortable truths about ourselves we habitually avoid. And that is exactly why Jung maintained that before we can use his insights on others, we must first have the integrity to face two seemingly simple mirrors ourselves. The first mirror: what we find unbearable in others. What kind of person can you absolutely not stand? Take a second. Be honest. Who makes your skin crawl, your jaw tighten? Is it the loudmouth who sucks all the air out of the room? The passive-aggressive coworker with their veiled insults? The perpetual victim who finds blame everywhere but in the mirror? Or maybe it's the hyper-ambitious person who seems to have no conscience? Whatever your answer, Jung would suggest something that might feel uncomfortable. You have just been introduced to a piece of your own shadow. These are fragments of your own personality you've rejected, disowned, or buried. The Jungian concept of the shadow isn't about being evil. It's about being incomplete. We all contain the entire spectrum of human potential, the capacity for love and for hate, for generosity and for greed, for courage and for cowardice. But as we grow and form our conscious identity, we inevitably edit ourselves, pushing the unwanted traits into the unconscious cellar that Jung called the shadow. The people who provoke the strongest reaction in us are rarely random. They are living, breathing examples of traits that exist within us, but which we deny. That arrogant person you despise, look closely. Where in your own life is there an unexamined relationship with pride? That passive, aggressive person driving you mad? Where in your life do you avoid direct conflict while subtly trying to get what you want? This isn't about blame. It's about integration. Jung saw that our fiercest judgments of others are almost never about them. They're about us. When we judge someone harshly, it's often because we see a denied part of ourselves, and that recognition sparks a primal fear we experience as annoyance, anger, or disgust. The shadow is not a monster to be slain. It's a teacher. It holds not only our rejected flaws, but also our buried, gold-positive strengths we disowned, because we were taught they were boastful or unacceptable. The confident person whose success triggers your envy might be showing you your own untapped power. The emotional person whose openness irritates you might be reflecting your own walled-off heart. The second mirror, our contract with imperfection. Think of a time you were utterly certain you were right, and it turned out you were wrong. This second mirror probes even deeper. It asks us to look at how we handle one of the most fundamental and difficult parts of being human, our fallibility. What happens inside you when your certainty shatters? Do you start building justifications? Do you lash out at the person or the facts that challenged you? Do you crumble into shame? Or do you double down, stubbornly refusing to yield? Or can you pause, breathe, and genuinely ask what this moment of error has to teach you? Jung knew our relationship with being wrong exposes our entire psychological framework. The person who cannot bear to be wrong is living in a prison of their own making, forced to constantly defend a fragile illusion of perfection. The person who drowns in shame is also trapped, unable to separate their self-worth from their intellectual accuracy. But the person who can sit with a mistake, who can inspect it with curiosity instead of hostility, connects with something profound. The humility Jung believed was the prerequisite for all real psychological growth. Such a person knows that certainty is often just an emotional state, that our view is always incomplete, and that being wrong isn't a verdict on your character, but simply new information. When you can reflect honestly on a time you were mistaken, you start to see the machinery that built that false certainty. You see your ego spinning its protective narratives. You see your mind cherry picking data to confirm its bias. You see how your emotional need to be right can make you blind. Jung's discovery was never merely intellectual. He knew that only when we have bravely faced our own shadow can we truly help others face theirs. Only when we have reconciled with our own fallibility can we understand what others are showing us when they answer these questions. Because projection is a two-way mirror. Just as we project our disowned traits, we project our unexamined psychological state. If you haven't done the work to know your own shadow, you will see shadows everywhere, but where they truly lie, inside you. If you haven't made peace with your own imperfection, you will fundamentally misinterpret how others wrestle with theirs. The person who has done this internal work develops what Jung called psychological acumen, the ability to see the dynamics beneath the surface behavior, to see that another's anger is often a mask for fear, that their arrogance is a defense against insecurity, that their rigidity is a desperate attempt to hold back chaos. But more than that, this person develops compassion, because once you've witnessed your own mind's incredible capacity for self-deception, for justification, for defending the indefensible, you stop being so shocked or judgmental when you see it in others. You no longer view these as just character defects, but as deeply human strategies for coping with a difficult world. Jung's greatest insight was not about mastering the art of reading others. It was about mastering the art of reading yourself. Because when you truly understand the landscape of your own inner world, when you have mapped your own shadow and accepted your own fallibility, a strange and wonderful thing happens. Other people stop being so confusing. You start to see that the coworker who enrages you is battling the same inner demons as you, just in a different costume. That the family member who drives you mad is running from the same core fears that you harbor. That the stranger whose actions seem baffling is just using a different strategy to meet the same fundamental human needs you have. This understanding doesn't excuse cruelty or remove the need for firm boundaries, but it changes your relationship with humanity from one of constant judgment to one of profound, compassionate understanding. As Jung himself famously said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. The question isn't if this knowledge will change how you see other people. It will. The question is if you are courageous enough to let it change how you see yourself. For as Jung discovered across decades of exploring the human soul, that is where all real transformation starts in the difficult, necessary, and ultimately freeing work of knowing yourself completely, shadow and all. Thank you for joining me on this journey to the very end. If you found value in our conversation today, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with one person you think might benefit. And if you wish to support our work further, you can leave a super thanks. It is a small gesture of appreciation that makes a huge difference in keeping this channel going.